My guest today is no stranger to the show. In fact, she not only sat down with me in season 2, we have since actually met in person, developed a bond over our mutual love for plants and herbal medicines, and her guidance on all health matters concerning women especially is one I trust and absolutely respect. She's an experienced clinical naturopath and herbalist who uses her training in naturopathy and Western and Eastern medicine to provide natural healthcare for women from puberty to menopause. She is a believer in the power of our bodies to express and heal, and she's committed to transforming symptoms into opportunities for learning, healing, and growth. In our last episode, we spoke about the healing power of herbs for women, and today I wanted to dig deeper into how we can access those plants and medicines in our everyday life, taking charge of our own healing by cultivating what we can and foraging for what we can't. So, I brought her back on the show to talk about her beautiful book, Wildcraft Guide, an in-depth look at botany and herbalism for wildcrafters. I certainly learned a thing or two about flowers and plants in this episode that blew my mind right out of my skull. And I hope it does the same for you, because this is essential wisdom we all need to know. Enjoy the episode. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is a place where women can tune in to gain peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be themselves through the stories of other women. If you're enjoying these episodes so far, click the like, share, and subscribe button so that more women like you can be positively impacted by the stories in this podcast. Welcome to the Skin I'm In podcast, Sulin. It's so great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Chanel. It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, here in my hot little hands, I have the book that we're going to be talking about and my little post-it notes because I've been through it already.
I love it.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. There we go. I'm obsessed. Can I just call out first and foremost the photography in this book? And I'm just going to, and while you're talking about it, I'm just going to do these because they're beautiful. Did you take these photos?
Yep, absolutely. Every photo is mine. Thank you for saying that, because I kind of feel like the mad photographer who stops on the sidewalk of the roads all the time taking photos of plants, and people think like Delulu. But actually, there is kind of a reason why I do it. I love creating this imagery, and I love the fact that the plants, they might seem like everyday ordinary plants, but to me, they're just these little works of beauty.
Look at that. That's a cherry. Is that cherry blossom?
That's cherry blossoms. That's just around the corner from my house, and it grows near to a really big cluster of sow thistle, which we should talk about today, and fumitory, which is one of the most beautiful, elegant pink wild weeds.
Yeah.
It's been used for hundreds of years to cleanse the liver. So perfect for women. Our livers do so many things for us in terms of breaking down our sugars, our hormones, our fats, and building our cholesterol as well for hormone development. So, yeah, love the liver lovers.
I also want to know about this because I've never heard of chickweed before, but this is such a beautiful close-up shot of whatever chickweed is. I'm like, I need to ask her what chickweed is, because I haven't been through this part of the book yet. I was obsessing over the front and your beautiful sweet pea at the back, which I finally was saying to you offline. I finally get to see your beautiful dog, Sweet Pea, because you've got a cute photo of her in the back.
Oh, yeah, she's my little ride or die fur baby companion on the crazy walks who never questions what I'm doing.
Yeah,
why it takes me so long.
She's taking photos again. All right, Mum. I'll just chill here for a moment. Okay, well, let's talk about the book. Well, let's talk about wildcrafting first. So
yes,
we're basically, wildcrafting is foraging for medicinal plants, for plants we can eat, and we can actually do that ourselves. It's like in our backyard when we go for walks and things like that. Is that what wildcrafting is? Have I got the gist of wildcrafting?
Yeah, you have got it 100%. So in terms of what it is as a practice, it's going out into the wild. Now, the wild could be your local parklands, or it could be really, really wild area, but it's going out into places where nature just does her thing, and the plants that flourish there are doing it because they have a real kind of like a life force and a striving to flourish in that area. So you're going out, you're looking around you, and you're finding plants that are either edible, in which case we usually use the term forage, and they could be medicinal plants, in which case we use the term wildcrafting. And the majority of herbal medicines that herbalists and naturopaths use are actually wildcrafted.
And so how did your journey to wildcrafting start? I mean, if you're anything like me, I'm the crazy plant lady that talks to my plants.
Yes.
So how did your journey start to wildcrafting?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to join you in that kind of crazy realm. My journey started with a tree hug. I was walking through Hyde Park. At the time, I was a photographer, so I've got that kind of background, and I was taking photos of my favorite tree. I had a name for her. I took photos of her at all times of day, and a lot of them in that time, just showing my age, were actually black and white photos. So I have all these beautiful black and white photos of her, and I was hugging this tree, and I kind of just started walking, almost as if I'm just going to take a walk now. And I ended up walking past the college where I trained to be a naturopath eventually. There was an open day. I went in to listen, and I became really interested in nutrition and healing naturally. And I'd just come out of a really stressful time in my life. I'd gone through divorce and the separation that comes with that. I'd been living in London for a while, so I'd moved back to Sydney, and I was just finding, who I was again. And so I think this tree was kind of like a bridge for me, and took me to this college somehow on this walk. It's very close by. And then I just started this whole new chapter. And then wildcrafting, once you start learning about how healing plants are, when you start learning that a plant like chickweed, which you were showing before, actually can give us 80% of our vitamin C recommended daily intake in just 100 grams. When you start learning about those sorts of things, it just triggers this passion, and also this knowing that everything we need is in nature. So I started to practice, and I got more and more into plants, and I started photographing plants and growing them. And I ended up teaching with a college called Nature Care, which is the most beautiful sort of community college, but it's not a community college, sorry, but it's got a beautiful community. And it's really like long established college. And they had me teaching this course called Medicinal Weeds. And that was like, how, all of a sudden I was out there every day. I was hanging around Centennial Park. I was doing the Bondi to Bronte walk. This is where I lived at the time. And I was just photographing and pressing these plants and studying them. So that's kind of where it all began. And that was about maybe 15 years ago. So the book is actually 15 years worth of obsession, if you like.
Yeah, I'd like, because like I'm flicking through the pages and I'm thinking to myself, these days I'm seeing a lot of, I don't even know what to call it, like a narrative that people who grow their own food or that forage for their own medicines, super right wing. And I don't know how ancient traditions became political. And so when I think of, wildcrafting, and you're explaining the tree, and I'm thinking for you it may have been a bridge, but when I think of a tree, it's literally setting down roots, the deepest root system that then gives life to everything else in your life. Because trees, that's what trees do, right? Their root system kind of in the forests, I think I was reading somewhere or heard someone talking about, gives life to a lot of the other flora on the floor of the rainforest. And so when you were saying it's your bridge, and I was like, oh, and goodness knows it made you set down some roots in this area of study, and now you help other people achieve this for themselves as well. So what actually inspired you to put it into a book and not just a course or something like that?
Great question. So it was when I was teaching the medicinal weeds course. This is kind of like a 7-week, 2 hours a week sort of course that the naturopath students and herbalist students would do as part of their training. It kind of got me doing a lot more research on the plants, because I wanted to know, for example, blackberry nightshade, which is one of our more native plants here. I didn't realize, but it had a long history of use in Mediterranean food. And it then didn't surprise me that it was very high in antioxidants. And so that got me sort of doing a lot of the research. And when I moved up to the northern beaches of Sydney, I started doing these cute little wildcraft walks. So it's usually like a bunch of us, and we would just spend 3 hours on a Sunday morning, and I would teach about the plants. And I produced this little booklet. It's like 80 pages long, but that was a lot. It was still a lot to create. So they had the booklets, and that had all the information on the plants. And then afterwards, we would have morning tea, which would be things like dandelion flower chocolate, or we would have jam made out of sow thistle flowers, or we would have little, I call them chips, but it's basically like kale chips. So you take plantain leaves and you kind of wash them and coat them with a little bit of oil, and then you put them in the oven for 15 minutes and they come up like a crispy seaweed snack. You hold them up to the light and you can see all the veins. It's fun, and then they're super tasty. So we were doing that. And so I thought with the book, what would be great is if I had the little bit of information on how to actually read plants, how to understand the language of plants. So what's the design? How do you describe that? What's a particularly good thing to be looking for when you're out in the wild? Is it red berries or black berries? What's going to be safer? So I wanted that kind of component, which was more the botany side. And then I wanted a lot more information on the plants so that I could bring together the research that's been done over the last 20 years on them. So this book actually has all the latest research, and it's, great clinical trials and studies done with these plants that look at all of their chemistry. So I wanted to just kind of bring that together. And then also, because we loved the chocolate and the chips and the jams and everything, I wanted to put lots of recipes in there, because it's knowledge that we want to bring into our home and then start to use these plants. So we want to be able to, say, bake a bread, but not use baby spinach from the supermarket that has maybe been sitting in a truck for, I don't know, a day or so. Maybe we want to use the dandelion leaves that have been growing in the garden, and they're going to give us all our vitamins, or maybe we want to put nettle into our breads or our salads, so we can, I guess, benefit from all the plants that are just growing around us. They have all the nourishment that we need, and we can, basically just take a walk in nature. And as you say, the benefits of growing your own is you get out in nature, and there's nothing more nourishing than that.
I've literally dug up my whole backyard so that I can start planting. And it's funny because I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm like, but how do I know it's not poisonous? And, dandelions are everyday weeds that we pick out, and they've got that white goopy stuff that's gross, or at least felt gross when we were kids. And now I have this like new appreciation for it. And I think I was telling you the last time we spoke, my dog Lucci, the little one, absolutely demolishes dandelions. She goes head first into any dandelion flowers that she sees, and I'm like, stop eating that. And then after speaking to you, I was just like, oh my God, it's probably because she intuitively knows that it's good for her. So what are some of the things that we, everyday things that we see in backyards or when we're going for walks that we don't even realize are medicinal or good for us?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder where to start with this one. I mean, we could go with dandelion, because dandelion actually grows in soils that have been very disrupted. So while dandelion is an amazing cleanser for our bodies, and it rejuvenates us, gives us lots of vitamins A, E, C, K. I mean, potassium's so important for us these days. But it also actually regenerates the soils. So if you see dandelion growing somewhere, you kind of get a sense, okay, this is good. This is a rejuvenation process now. These soils are going to be healthier and better off for having the dandelion growing there. And also, I don't feel so bad about mowing down the dandelion either, because I know this is all part of the process, and the dandelion grew there to regenerate the soil. I'm going to mow it, and then I'm going to wait for the new fresh dandelions to come through. So it's a really good example of a plant that's there for nature as well as being there for us. And in terms of what it does for us, it works on a couple of key systems in our body. So the first one is the kidneys. And a lot of us tend to hold fluid in our bodies. You know, if we have an inflammatory disease, we tend to hold a lot more fluid on. If we're women or men in the midlife, we tend to hold more fluid on. If we have any sort of illness or respiratory infection, we feel a little bit puffier, we're holding onto fluid. And dandelion's really the best plant for flushing that fluid out. So it cleans us and it cleanses our cells, and it helps us to remove this excess moisture in our body so we can feel light and fresh again, which in a way is kind of what it does for the soils too. And then the other system that it works on is the liver system. And the liver in Chinese medicine, it's the kind of like the seat of emotions. It's very, very important for women, particularly around the cycles, because the liver is so busy before each menstrual cycle begins, filtering blood and arranging the blood flow. And so when we get to that time, just before the menstrual period kicks in, there's usually this emotionality and sensitivity increases, and that's very much a liver expression. And dandelion has the ability to improve liver function so that you're able to detoxify more efficiently. What that means is that by the time you get to that menstrual cycle, your liver isn't bogged down so much by the high sugar diet or the refined or processed foods that you might have been eating or the alcohol you might have been drinking. Your liver is happier, and therefore you have better cycles, better kind of regulation of those emotions. And in the naturopathic perspective, the liver is the detoxifier. It also helps with fat breakdown and hormone regulation. So when we look at it from more of a biomedical or naturopathic perspective from the West, we see how important it is to keep our liver clean and healthy, because that means we're going to have better hormone balance and we're going to be more detoxified. And so dandelion is really one of those plants that works on multiple systems, but it cleanses your body. And there's really no reason why we shouldn't be mass cultivating dandelion. If you go to your local markets, you'll probably find bunches of dandelion there. I've got it growing on my balcony. I've always had a dandelion plant on the balcony in a pot, and I just harvest the leaves as I need. So that's probably the most common one. There are some that look like it as well. A lot of the wild growing weeds actually begin their life as what we call a basal rosette of leaves. So it's all these leaves that fan out around a center point. Dandelion does that. So when you look at it, it's kind of like looking at a green doily. And there are others like sow thistle that will begin a bit like this. It doesn't have the total rosette, but it looks like the leaves are fanning out. Shepherd's purse, which is one of our oldest herbs that midwives would use. Say a couple hundred years ago, they would use it to stop women from bleeding after giving birth. And they would also use it to stop really heavy bleeding in women. So shepherd's purse also begins its life as that little basal rosette, doily looking, kind of like a green, little green circle of leaves. And they change as they grow up. But all of them will have this liver affinity, because one of the main things that I learned when I was studying Chinese herbalism was that the color of a plant is a very critical indicator of which organ system it's going to have an affinity with. So when you see that green, its affinity is with liver. Particularly when you see yellow and green together, that's a strong liver digestive affinity. That means if you suffer from any sort of digestive disease, or if you have constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, even if you have something like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or if you just get hiccups, reflux, stomach feels a bit full sometimes, and your digestion is very slow, then dandelion is a perfect match for you. It has those calling cards, the bright yellow flowers, the green leaves, and that's a real liver herb. Sow thistle is exactly the same. The bright yellow flowers, the green leaves, and the leaves look a little bit similar when it's immature, but as it grows up, it starts to look quite different. And the one that you mentioned before, chickweed. Chickweed is one that actually the birds love, which is the reason why it's called the chickweed. So if you like birds around you, so let's just go past even being healthy in our bodies, but having pollinators. Okay, so we need pollinators, don't we? So we want the bees, we want the birds, we want the butterflies. that's when you plant chickweed, because all the birds will flock. So they'll just be hanging around wherever the chickweed is growing, and they will then spread the chickweed for you. So you might get chickweed growing in the northern part of your garden at the beginning of spring, and then by the end of spring, you've got 3 more patches in other areas of your home that the birds have spread for you because they drop the seeds. So it will attract the insects, which is so great for anything else that you're growing. And then when you look at chickweed on its own, it's the most amazing anti-itch remedy. And if you've ever had like eczema, psoriasis, insect bites, tick bites, and they're just so voluptuously itchy, that's when you grab a handful of chickweed and you put a bit of moisture in it, some water, you squish it up and you slap it straight on. And it takes all of that itch and that sting away. It helps the skin to heal. And perhaps part of that is that vitamin C content, that 80% of your recommended daily intake is a massive amount of vitamin C. So they're just 4 of the plants. There are plenty more, but they're the ones that I find are often quite easy to locate. And when you look through the book, you can see I've broken down the features of them. So you start to get to know, that flower's a little bit smaller than the dandelion flower, or the dandelion leaf always has edges. It's quite sharp edges that point down to the base of the leaf down the bottom. That's its kind of feature, whereas the others don't have that. So you become quite fluent, I guess, in the language of these plants.
Sulin, I have so many questions. Firstly, I want to acknowledge how interesting it is that I found chickweed to be the most interesting plant in there, and I wanted to ask you about, given that I have psoriasis, or I had psoriasis, and it's I don't believe in coincidences. You're guided. I'm always guided. And the other thing that I was thinking about is bees. Because I'm like, I get that they're pollinators, Sulin, but I can't do bees. But in saying that, the beauty of what you're saying to me, or at least the beauty that I'm finding in what you're talking about, is that this is wisdom that we have forgotten but can reconnect with. And they're such beautiful plants that you kind of disregard them as being a pest, right? And yet here is a flower that everyone tries to dig out and get rid of that is a liver cleanser. Blows my mind. Blows my mind. I can't even fathom the amount of plants that most of us, I'm going to say 98% of us, do not know about, that's literally under our feet every single day. And yet, whoever that person is that's walking past them probably has a pharmaceutical something in a box in their cabinet that they're taking, that they could literally substitute with what we call weed, that's really actually medicine.
Yes. Can I give you an example of that?
Oh, please.
I know that everyone loves to drink green tea, partly because it's got a little bit of caffeine, but also because it's one of those weight loss teas, right? So it helps to kind of stimulate your metabolism. So last year I thought, I'm middle-aged, I need to work on this belly fat, and I wanted to get my belly fat down. And I didn't have a specific goal, but I knew that I wanted it to be significant. So I continued eating as I was, just eating healthy, but I had this tea, and the tea, I call it slimming tea, and actually I sell it to my clients now because it was so good. And so this tea is partly dandelion leaf. And what I noticed was that when I was drinking that tea every morning, I had no more bloating after about 2 weeks. So the midlife bloat is a real thing. It's kind of like waking up every morning before you've eaten, you've already feel bloated. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing, because I haven't changed much else. I'm not taking medicines. I actually, in fact, was hardly taking any supplements at all. I think I just took an omega-3, but the dandelion leaf tea. And so then by the time I reached about 8 weeks, I had dropped 10 centimeters on my waistline. And that is just from drinking this tea and eating healthy. And then about 4 weeks later, this is now getting into 2025, I noticed that I had also dropped about 8 centimeters on my hips. So this is the circumference, right? So if you want to look at your metabolic health, like BMI is okay as a marker, but do your waist and hip measurements and find out what they are and then try and get them down if you need to. So the tea, and then I ended up running out of it because it was sold out and I was waiting for more to come in, and I had about a week without it. And I noticed that I was getting that fluid weight coming back in again. So definitely, it's not always like a 2-day, 3-day cure, but it's a really enjoyable morning ritual. You pour your tea, you drink it, and then you don't feel bloated, and you're losing this sort of kind of visceral water weight that we all seem to carry in midlife. And dandelion's one example of that. The other one is when you mentioned the chickweed, my son has some eczema. So he's kind of got that chronic eczema that just flares up whenever his skin gets dry, or he gets stressed, and there's other aspects to it as well. But I found that I was making a lot of chickweed infused oils. And you know how easy it is to make an infused oil? You get your chickweed fresh, you give it a little shake, get any insects out, you put it in a jar, and you pour on your oil. That's it. And you give it about 4 weeks to kind of infuse. So I made this beautiful chickweed oil, was putting that on and turning it into ointments and lotions. And it's so delicately gentle. And that's what you need in a condition like that. The other thing you said, like when you mentioned, have we forgotten this? I think we innately know that the plants that we can use medicinally, we innately know that they can be useful, but we have in a way reduced them to being decorative. And that was really never the case. If you go back to even the Middle Paleolithic period or Neanderthal times, there is evidence that, yes, flowers were used decoratively in burials, but they were in the teeth. They're actually in the gum, like where the gums were. So they were eaten and they were part of the diet. And they were used also to heal ulcers and all sorts of wounds on the body. So there was always this sort of this acceptance that they're medicine, and yes, they're beautiful. But I think today we've kind of gone the other way, whereas they're beautiful and some of them can be medicines. But if we kind of, I guess, open ourselves to learning a bit more about them, we discover that actually a lot of them are medicinal. Like, yes, they're beautiful, but so many are medicinal. And it's actually a fascinating thing as we, as a culture, move into this time in our lives where we've come so far from those early days of sending our children out in the garden in the afternoons to just do whatever they want, spend some time in the garden. We're indoors and we're out of the sunlight and we're not breathing the fresh air, and we get into this nature deficit disorder sort of realm. But this is a way for us to regain a little bit of that innate wisdom. It's in there. The more time we spend in nature, the more we understand nature, and then we get all the benefits as well.
So are you saying it doesn't actually matter what stage of, let's use dandelion as an example, what stage of the plant that you eat? Like you can eat a fresh flower, you can have it as a dried tea, like dry leaf tea. Does the potency matter in that, in the way that it's prepared?
So once the plant has gone to a flowering stage, it means that the plant itself has shifted its resources into the flower, because flowers are actually reproductive organs for a plant. So once the plant is in its leafing format, it's putting a lot of energy into those leaves. Now, if you want the dandelion leaves, you actually want to get them before the flowers come out, because you want all the nutrients in the leaves. By the time the flowers have come out, the plant, due to its survival instincts, will actually put a lot of energy and a lot of nutrition into the flowers, because the flowers, once the bees come, once the pollinators come and fertilize those flowers, they will actually have to go through a major development stage. So the flowers will ripen, the ovaries will swell, and they will turn into fruit and seeds. So if you're wanting to kind of work on a particular body system like liver, you want to just get the leaves of the dandelion before the flowers come out. There's a way you can do this actually if you grow it yourself, because dandelion is a very forgiving plant. You can grow it in your shady garden and it will produce predominantly leaves for you, which is what I do. That's why it's on the balcony and it's not in the middle of my garden patch, right? Because I mainly want the leaves. As you said, middle age, water loss, all that stuff. But if you want the flowers, then you allow it to grow in the sunniest part of your garden and it will produce predominantly flowers. So you can tailor, how you want that plant to grow depending on where you grow it. And it's not with every single plant, but this one is particularly good like that. And it doesn't matter whether you use, by the way, whether you're using it dried or fresh. The only difference is that if you're using it fresh, the herbalist rule of thumb is you use twice as much. So if you get good results with, like a tablespoon of dried dandelion leaves, then if you're using it fresh, you need 2 tablespoons to get the same sort of dose.
Why does it differ if it's dried or fresh?
The difference is actually in the water content. So when plants are growing fresh, they have a lot of water in their cells. When they die and release that water, they shrink. So they get really, really small, which means that the same amount of plant when it was fresh, by the time it's dried, will be a fraction of that size.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I can't help but feel so emotional that you're talking about flowers being like ovaries. I'm like, what? And just that, what you were saying earlier that I have to circle back to, because this for me is such a beautiful part of of a flowering process, I guess. The fact that the dandelions grow where they're regenerating soil. What? Like, what? That is unbelievable. And then if you think about what they do in the body, they kind of regenerate your liver as well. And I'm just like, my mind is like throwing all kinds of sparks out. And I'm like, okay, my backyard has been dug up. I've got nothing there. But when the things return, I'm going to just be going out there with my book, just like, what are you? All the things that were growing in the backyard. I thought to myself, what is this? Actually, I had, there was this thing that grows like a starfish and has these, the tentacles are like they look like rhubarb. It's the only way I can explain it because they're so beautiful in color. And the leaves were these beautiful round green leaves. And I thought, why is this growing wildly all over the floor of this backyard? And then this random post comes up on Facebook saying, this is one of the most medicinal plants you'll ever come across. Don't overlook them. I'm like, how did Facebook know, first of all, that I've got this all over my backyard? And then I'm like, now I don't remember what it's called, so I don't even know how to look this damn plant up. I'm like, I need to know because it grows everywhere in this suburb that we've moved to. So I'm so fascinated as to why this suburb, I've never seen this plant before. When we moved here, you see them everywhere.
Could you send me a picture of that? I'd love to see the plant, and then I'll see, if I can identify it. I wanted to just point out when you were saying that in the book, there is a botany primer. So to take you from that point where you've kind of seen that this plant is growing and you have a sense there's a reason why it's growing, maybe it's useful for me. The botany primer teaches you how to describe the plants in botanical terms so that then you can go and find out exactly what it is. And I think that's the difference between this book for wildcrafting and any of the others, because the others just assume that you kind of know what a basil rosette arrangement is for leaves, or you know what a linear leaf shape is, or maybe you know what a hirsute leaf surface is compared to a more of a softer waxy one. So the botany side of it is a lot of fun as you start to learn all the terminology. And you also learn things like when flowers, as the reproductive organs, when they develop in usually four kind of sections. And on the outside, you have the sepals, which look a little bit like leaves. But whenever you see a flower bud, you normally see these leaves coming around the flower bud. That's the sepals. So they're there for protection. And then under that, you have the petals. And the petals we often think are the prettiest parts of a flower. And you know what? The pollinators think that too. The petals actually have particular colors and even fluorescent markings that we can't see, but the pollinators can see. And those markings are like a landing strip for an aeroplane. So the pollinator will see the flower petal, and then it will follow these little fluorescent dots that come down the petal, and it will end up going right down into the ovary section. So as you get down in the flower and you're kind of going into the deeper parts now, you normally have the male parts which are producing the pollen, and the male parts surround and hold the feminine part, which is the ovary. So I think the flowers actually are a beautiful metaphor, if you like, for how we can be with ourselves as well, because we have this beautiful, delicate feminine on the inside. And then we kind of have to develop it in a way, particularly women, we have to cultivate things like boundaries, but we have to develop the masculine to hold that, like the structure. And then you can be free and loose and beautiful within the structure. So I always thought that flowers were kind of a lot more than just this physical entity. I just love the design of flowers. In fact, I've gone completely off track and I can't remember what you asked me now.
It's totally fine, because as you were talking, what came up for me is, in the book you talk about, asking the flowers permission before you, or, the plants permission before you harvest them, and then thanking them and giving back to the earth that you've harvested them from. And it reminded me of a book that I read, Braiding Sweetgrass, and I don't remember the author now, but I just thought, what an interesting thing to do. And it would take, practice. But the more you're talking about flowers and plants, the more of an appreciation I have for them. And I'm like, they are so much more complex than we give them credit for. And they somehow just exist with what seems like not very much, but they've been able to utilize everything in, on the surface of this earth, the sunlight, the moisture and the soil and everything, to be able to continue to create life and have that cycle of life be, regenerative. And I'm sitting here in awe of these plants, and I'm like, I am going to go outside. When I take the dogs for a walk, I'm just going to talk to everything, because it becomes so much easier to express gratitude to things that you have more of an understanding of. I never realized that the flower is like the reproductive system of a plant. Like, who thinks of that? No one thinks of that in their day-to-day.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and a good illustrator of how we have come to view plants as decorative. And we've kind of, the herbalists, obviously we're all obsessed. So we don't see plants just as decorative. We kind of get all, into the details, into the weeds, if you like, with plants. Yeah, they have really interesting features too. There's a plant called mullein. Speaking of, things we might never really think about with plants, but mullein is a lung restorative. So it's really one of the best herbs for us during COVID, to retrain our lungs in how to breathe properly. A lot of people have long COVID and, coughs and sore throats and histamine issues and chronic inflammation. All that stuff is happening now after COVID. So mullein actually has these long leaves, and the leaves are very hairy. They're the thickest leaves I've ever come across. And the hair is so much so that we call it woolly, like a woolen jumper. So when you can kind of like brush it like this, it's like velvet. And that's in herbalist terms a bit of a sign, one of those language signs from nature. It's telling us this is how I'm going to feel in your body on your poor, dehydrated and spent lungs. I'm going to come in there very soft, very gentle, and I'm going to heal all those surfaces, the mucous membranes. I'm going to rebuild, if you think about it in the digestive tract, I'll rebuild the villi, all those tiny villi that get removed with inflammation. And it definitely does that. It's one of our best ever herbs for lung restoration. It grows in the wild, and I found through experience that It just likes to grow where it likes to grow. It doesn't appreciate you trying to put it places. I had one that just popped up in a garden I had down on the south coast in Lake Conjola. And at one stage, it was taller than me. It was about 2 meters tall. And it was magnificent. So it had all these beautiful velvet leaves, so almost like that long, coming out of the ground. And then this spike, which used to be called an Aaron's rod. And it was a reference to maybe like Viking era times when it was used as a candle wick, but very, very tall. And then on that, you get all these beautiful yellow flowers. Very, very cleansing plant that's kind of screaming out to us to use it whenever we feel in our bodies that we've become inflamed, irritated in our mucous membranes, and we need something very soothing. So that's a really good example of just some of those little features of plants that are speaking to us.
And so if someone does want to start wildcrafting, what advice would you give who wants to start going on this journey?
Okay, my first thing would be to get a book. It could be my book, but just get a book. Because my first most I guess important goal would be to do it safely, so that you are harvesting herbs that you recognize. Second thing would be to just start observing. Now, this could start in your garden, because chances are that in your garden, you probably have at least 5 or 6 of these plants. I go on a walk with my dog every morning, Sweet Pea, and we'll see at least 10 to 15 different medicinal plants. So if you start looking in your own garden, you will see them coming up. I mean, let's take wandering dew for an example. Wandering dew creates allergies in the skin. It's an irritant, but you turn it into a tea and it becomes a wash for that irritation. So never kind of just assume that a plant only has one aspect to it. There's always going to be some more we can discover. Nasturtium is another one that often grows in gardens, particularly suburban gardens. Chickweed grows in gardens. And probably my absolute favorite, my favorite that it's actually my favorite photograph in the whole book, is a plant called Beedens. And Beedens is actually, I'll see if I can get this picture up here. Yeah, Beedens is a plant that grows, isn't it beautiful, throughout Australasia, throughout the world. And it's best known for being the one that gets stuck to your socks. It's known as cobbler's pegs, has those little brown sticky seeds that stick to everyone's socks and dog's fur, and it just drives you mad. But think about this. That one plant can produce, I think, somewhere up to 30,000 seeds per plant. So we might think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of seeds to take off your socks. But we can also think, wow, what an evolutionary advantage. How intelligent is this plant that it was able to design its flowers and fruit in such a way that it could produce up to 30,000 seeds per plant. And it's also being used in herbalism, particularly in New Zealand and in China. It's one of their herbs for, cleansing the kidneys, working with gout, cystitis, urinary tract infections, and all of that. That pretty much grows in every garden I've seen. So that's one I would start looking out for. And, what a wonderful urinary cleanser for our bodies. Particularly for women, keeping our urinary tract clean is a really good thing to do once we get to about 35 onwards.
I've always wondered what those things are, because they get stuck in my dog's feet all the time. And now I'm like, I'm going to start looking for a plant, because they just somehow appear all over our house because they come in with the dog's paws. And now I'm just going to I think I know where it is. There is a house down the road where they seem to have these tall little white, I'm turning into that lady. I'm turning into that lady in the street. Oh my God, watch out, my neighbors. Oh my goodness. Okay, so if we're out foraging, and you brought up the safety thing, because one of the things that I am probably most cautious about is, especially around community parks and things like that, whether there's pesticides on them, whether they're spraying, because they are like council areas and they're trying to keep everything neat and tidy. So you're saying to try and start cultivating in your own backyard before you start going and picking on the nature strip? Is that what you were saying?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. So what I started doing was when I was wildcrafting, like 15 years ago, I didn't notice a lot of spraying, but today I have noticed a bit of spraying, particularly if you're around soccer fields or parklands. And that's often where these plants like to grow, because remember, the earth is trying to heal itself. So if it's getting all these sprays, all these glyphosates, all these toxins, it's going to put plants in there that have a detoxifying action, like beetons, dandelions, sow thistle. They're all detoxifiers. So what I like to do is, if I see a plant in the wild and I'm thinking this is great, this would be good for my tea this evening. If it's pretty much green all over, if it's got flowers, if it's got all the life stages, so it's got the leaves and the flowers and the fruit, I'm happy usually, and I can just snip a few leaves, wash it, take it home. If there's any doubt, so if, for example, I turn around and I see a brown bush behind me and I know that's been sprayed, then what I usually do is I will harvest the seeds from the plant that I'm wanting and I take it home. And this is advice I was given by a farmer some years back. So I take it home and then I grow it through 3 generations. So I put it in the earth, organic soil, I let it grow up, I let it flower, I wait till it fruits, then I take the seeds and then I start again. So I get a new pot, organic soil, I grow that one again. So that's a 2nd generation. And I do that again to get to the 3rd generation. So that's normally enough time for those toxins to be able to be removed, providing that I'm putting it into fresh organic soil each time. There is this thing that we know about these toxins. They kind of remain in the soil for a long time. When you do the growing through the generations, you're actually relying on that plant's dynamic ability to cleanse itself. So it will naturally do that. In order to survive, it has to be able to purify and cleanse and remove those toxins and substances that it doesn't need. So I think that process of growing it at home through a few generations means that you now have access to that plant in your garden whenever you want. And you also have a lot of control over how it's being cared for. And when you mentioned before about giving back to the earth, you go out, you ask for permission, you put a little bit of incense powder or something nice, or you say a prayer, like Om Mani Padme Hum, this beautiful prayer, the jewel in the lotus. This is another way you can say thank you to nature, because you're actually helping nature to flourish by bringing that plant back to your garden and creating this new colony, this new healthy, vibrant colony that feels wanted and loved. I have no doubt that plants are very aware of what's around them. Even in the sense of some documentaries have shown that plants will change their chemistry when they feel that a predator is coming closer. So they'll actually reduce the amount of delicious chemistry so the predator doesn't eat as much. Or they might, in the example of the lavender plant, I remember the kangaroos used to love eating my lavender down at Lake Conjola, but they'd only eat so much. And so what the plants will do is they'll know the predator is grazing, and they'll know that it's in their own best interest not to share too much of that delicious chemistry. And it's in their best interest to maybe put something out that will deter that predator. So lavender will go into overproduction of the volatile oils, which make everyone a little bit heady. And so these drunk kangaroos feasting on my lavender and then having enough, that's a sign to me that, okay, they know that if they eat any more, they're going to be sick, or they're going to be very tired or dizzy.
That's so fascinating. And I was saying to my husband the other day, we've reconcreted areas of our backyard, but we've also taken a whole bunch of concrete away so that I can have some more grass and some more area for planting. And I said, I want to put lavender next to the fence. And then I was just like, oh, no, actually, the fence, the wood has been treated. I don't want to grow anything against that fence. So I have to create a box for it to grow in. But, I think to myself, when it comes to plants and what you were just talking about, would it be easier if I just went and bought a seed?
You absolutely can. Some of them are easy to get. Some of them might not be sort of commercially sold. just because they're not so well known, or perhaps they're not seen as that commercial a product, for success. But yeah, you definitely can buy chickweed seeds. You can buy dandelion seeds. I actually think it's not a bad idea also that you may not just harvest the seeds, but you might take a baby plant. So if there are lots of them in the area, just take one baby plant and take that home and do that growing through the generations. I just found that a little bit easier in terms of getting the plants to grow and flourish if they're already in that seedling state. I have tried doing a bit of growing by seed, and I'm not the best gardener. I may love plants, but I find it hard to kind of control their light exposure and get the soil balance right and the moisture balance right. So I tend to go for the tiny baby plants where I can. Otherwise, you could, I suppose, just go out, Google, when you've got the names of the plants, Google them, and then see what comes up. Try it out, sprinkle a few seeds around your garden and see what takes. And then when they take, it's when you carefully dig them up and put them into the place where you'd like them to grow, ideally.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I only say that because so many people are time poor. And I love gardening. I love plants. I love getting my hand into the dirt, but it is about trying to work out, where in the backyard's going to work best, and how much light are they going to need, and how much water are they going to need, and all those kind of things. And so I sometimes find like it's maybe less time consuming, a little bit more convenient. And then at the same time, in the back of my head, like I'm thinking to myself, or at least I'm telling myself, but this is the whole point, Chanel, to learn how to cultivate. It's like that ancient wisdom slapping the back of my brain going, this is the whole point. Learn how to cultivate them, learn how to grow them, but it's just so, who has all that time in the day? Oh, it's so frustrating. I wish I could literally spend my whole day doing this kind of stuff. And it's funny when I said to my husband, I finally got Sulin's book. It's like, oh, what's it about? And I told him, he's like, whoa, that is right down your alley. Like I must have been like a herbalist in a past life or something, because I gravitate towards this stuff so, so much. And I'm always looking at plants. And when I first met him, he's like, why do you touch everything that you like, all the trees and the bushes that you walk past? I was like, I don't know. It's just something that I've always done as a kid. I just run my fingers along these plants and trees and leaves, and I'm always touching these things. And he's like, you're so strange, but you're so interesting. And so I guess that was one of the things that he's like, she's mysterious. She keeps touching things. Maybe she knows stuff. I don't know. But when we talk about the importance of growing our own food, right? And I get that, you as a herbalist and herbalists around the world are obsessed with this kind of stuff. When you talk about the pesticides and the herbicides and the impact that they're having on our hormones, is it really just as simple as introducing dandelion to our diet to cleanse? Or is there more of a process? And I guess that's from you as a naturopath and a herbalist, from the clinical perspective. Is it that easy to just cleanse ourselves from the herbicides and the pesticides and all the crap that they're putting in our food?
Yeah, we're in a world now where it's very hard to control our environment, and I think most of us would love to go on a rewilding journey. And we would love also to feel like we had the freedom from work and family responsibilities, etc., to be able to do that. But it's not a reality for many of us. So rather than letting it totally overwhelm us, I think a good approach is to do positive things every day and make positive choices. So, maybe we're making a cup of tea, and we might make a positive choice to have that cup of tea in the sun to get our vitamin D rather than, sitting in front of the TV or something like that. We can make all those small choices that do help. With the toxins in the environment that are coming into our bodies, and they definitely are causing a lot of issues, particularly with our fat mass for women as well, fat mass around middle age. Also with our cognitive abilities, with our hormones, they're disrupting a lot of cycles. So that's going to be a bit of a process, and it can start with drinking dandelion leaf tea. Yes, it is that simple. You can start with drinking dandelion leaf tea. what you might find is that from the dandelion leaf tea, you go to making your beautiful bread loaf and putting dandelion leaves into that. And then from there, you might go to learning about, oh, dandelion flower essence. What's that? And then you might start using flower essences, whether it's in prayers or meditation or water. You just drop it in your water. And from there, you might find that you start looking at dandelion when you're out and about a lot more. And so you're growing more dandelion. And what's actually happening is on this sort of subconscious level, you're developing your relationship with nature. And truly, there's nothing more, I think, that we want as a civilization, but to have a relationship with nature. Because as soon as we step away from that, there's this flatness, this apathy, or we can get distracted in the world. You know, we can be in the world, but it's not necessarily bringing us joy. So when we get back to that reconnection, there's just this beautiful, exquisite joy in that. And then we model that to our children as well, and to the future generations. So you can trust that once you make a few positive steps, that things will start to unfold, you know. So maybe 3 months ago, you were buying your fresh greens at Coles or Woolies, and now 3 months later, you're buying your fresh greens at the local markets. And then in a few months, you're eating half of the fresh greens from your garden and half from the local market. And then you're inspiring your friends to do things with you relating to nature. So things will unfold very much like in a flower. You get this seed and it has all this potential to be so many beautiful things. And as it grows, it produces these amazing photosynthetic leaves. And then the stems grow tall and reach towards the sunlight. And then the flowers start to blossom. So it all started with a seed. And it can be the same way in terms of us navigating through this world, which can feel very overwhelming and a little bit scary, to be honest. But it just starts small. Have something in mind. It may not be a dandelion leaf. You know, maybe you grow in an area where dandelion doesn't flourish, but it could even just be getting the book and reading the book, you know, or it could be resonating with one of the plants, buying it, buying the plant online, getting it posted to you, wrapped up in wet newspaper. I mean, newspaper, who reads newspapers anymore? My hubby. But yeah, wrapped up in wet newspaper, put it in the garden. The journey begins. So it doesn't have to be you this way one day and totally transform the next. The beauty's in the transformation. So it just has to be you taking some sort of step, whatever that might be.
I love that because it's so true in my mind. I'm like, how do I go from this to having a full-on garden patch, veggie patch, flower patch? I'm like, whoa, I need to just like learn to grow a dandelion. Like, calm your farm, Chanel. So, whether you have the answer to this or not, I would love to know what has worked for you. Because I think that one of the things that come up for me when you're saying this is, what do we grow our food in? So when we think of organic soil, okay, that's swamp. But then a lot of the pots and things that are out there, they're plastic.
Yeah. So for us, we've always sort of dug out, when we moved up to the Northern Beaches, we dug out the little stretch of soil that was there to grow our herbs in. So we dug that out and moved that soil to another part of the garden. And then we got a delivery of organic soil. So that's kind of what we started with. So we don't use sprays and things like that. I mean, I know a lot of people use tick sprays and all that stuff, but we basically just put the organic soil in and then kind of step away, like don't touch. And then we grew a few plants. And in answer to your question, how do I get to that big flourishing herb patch? You don't necessarily have to do all the work. You just have to put one of them down, because you will find that once you get one of them down, chickweed's a good one. It will start drawing the other plants in. You'll get more and more of them coming up. No doubt you'll have beetons coming up, you know, and snip those leaves before those little seeds start growing, so they don't catch on all your clothes. So just snip it early. But yeah, so you might have maybe 3 plants that you start with, and the others will eventually come in around them. They do like to grow with culinary herbs because there's a lot of nutrition in that soil, and they will improve the nutrition of your culinary herbs as well. For example, one of the herbs in the book, stinging nettle, is of course well known for creating that stinging pain on your hands, but it also is a very nourishing herb. So what you can do with nettle is, even if you don't plan to harvest it and use it, you can grow it and you can snip the leaves and put them back into the soil. And nettle is what I call the green multivitamin. It has all the fat-soluble vitamins and the water-soluble vitamins, and it has a lot of protein. So you're putting all of that nourishment back into your soil that will benefit all of the plants. And second to that, our little patch of garden is not directly outside my kitchen. I like to have things really easy to kind of pick. So I have these clay pots that I put on the balcony, and they're the ones that have the individual plants. So I've got some ashwagandha growing. I've got some chickweed, lemon balm, peppermints, dandelion. So I've just got them in their pots. And yes, they take a little bit more work, but you get so much more control over what they're exposed to. And if it's a particularly kind of dreary winter, I will be able to pick them up and move them, which is the beauty of saying, no, you're still going to get your sunlight. So yeah, it gives you some flexibility to be able to do it both ways if you're able to. And you might be someone who also wants to just grow plants in an apartment, in which case, absolutely go for the pots and move the pots as needed. And, the book and a lot of other books will tell you what sort of growing conditions these plants like. Just be sure to choose the right growing conditions and the right plants so that you're not trying desperately to grow something that just needs more sunshine or something that gets burnt too easily.
That makes it so much easier and less overwhelming. Thank you. So I'm like, what do I grow it in? Sometimes I feel so overwhelmed in that I'm like, I try so hard to reduce the toxins, the plastic, all the things in my life. And then, you see some Instagram, somebody saying, oh, the gym tights you're wearing, it's disrupting your endocrine system. I'm like, I just want to give up some days. So that makes it so, and those clay pots are pretty. Some of them can look really pretty. So yeah, that makes it a lot easier. And I love the fact that you said that I can pick up and move it. I think that's so, so great, because that now solves the problem of what I was going to put in a particular spot outside now that we've got the new concrete down. So I do love that. And I'm going to take a slight segue here, because one of the things that we spoke about in our last conversation is I'd asked you what you love about being a woman. And so what is resonating with me from this conversation is that your answer to that was that, the learnings in the changes that occur through our menstruation, the opportunity to evolve, and the pathway to self-realization that's unique, and we create new life and we let go of new life each cycle. And this whole conversation around getting from the leafy stage to the flowering stage, and then the seeds, and then they drop and then they regrow, and that regenerative process really had me wondering whether your perspective had evolved on what you love about being a woman. Has anything changed since our last conversation that has become more of a thing that resonates with you?
Yeah, really interesting question. I've been doing a lot more research for a project at the moment on the impact on perimenopause on women's sort of psychological journey through life. And the only thing I would add in there is that as women, yes, I still 100% believe that we are the masters of transformation, or the mistresses of transformation, whatever you want to call it. We got this. But I also have been finding in the research that we have never before, as a collective group of women, been exposed to so much pollution or so many chemicals, so much midlife stress and demands from society, and we can have it all, but we can also choose if it's serving us to have it all. But I truly believe that as women, we've got the transformation thing down. We've got a lot more that we're facing compared to our predecessors. But I feel like we've got this. We can do this as a collective. And that's just, that's the power of being a woman. So There are things I love about being a woman. There's also the power that I see within being a woman.
And I think that even that whole conversation about dandelions, right, and that regenerating the soil, I really think that we have the ability to regenerate ourselves from within, even, in the work that you do and how you help women with their hormones and all the other things that you help women with, that we really have this incredible ability to regenerate and transform and create who we are. And so when you were talking, I was just like, oh my God, I was remembering what you had said in our last conversation. I'm like, this is so fitting that, you literally spoke about that in our last episode, and it's coming up again. But in this conversation, it's coming up in the form of plants and flowers, and I just love every part of that. So please share again with our listeners where they can find you and how they can work with you.
Amazing. So you can find me on Instagram at perimenopause.naturopath. You can find me on Facebook. I think it's just Sulin Naturopath there. There's my website, herbalwell.com.au, herbal as in Herbal and well. And it's been an absolute delight to chat to you, Chanel, today.
Yeah.
Fellow plant lady.
Fellow plant lady, indeed. And I will include, obviously all the episode in the episode description, all the links and ways that they can contact you. And especially, I am going to put a very direct link to get your hands on this book. It is beautiful. The detail in this book, I'm obsessed with. I love that there's little pictures of the stages of the plant growth, and you talk about the lines in the leaves and the things that you should look out for, nutrient profiles. It's so jam-packed with incredible things. I've got a lot of books on herbal tinctures and medicines and stuff, and I'm not saying this just because you're sitting in front of me and I adore you as a human being, but it's one of the most in-depth and easy to follow books that I've come across. So thank you for the work that you've put into this. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. That's so beautiful. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sulin, for being a guest on the Skin I'm In podcast once again. I was moved more times than I can count during this conversation. It's no secret that I'm obsessed with dogs, to the point that my husband is worried he's going to come home one day to find our house converted into an animal shelter or foster home, and me on the floor with like 100 dogs that I adopted because I couldn't choose which one I wanted to rehabilitate first. I think the root of my passion for dogs stems from the wonder I have for how kind they are, how loving they can be, even after abuse and neglect. They just have this incredible will to love and be loved, to bring joy and light, and to heal and protect us as humans. After this conversation with Sulin, I'm starting to feel the same deep sense of wonder for plants, their ability to regenerate not just themselves, but entire ecosystems, both above and below ground. I never realized how much they move through phases, just as we do as women. We call it menstruation or our cycles. We research endlessly how to change our bodies, increase fertility, manage stress-induced hormonal shifts, navigate each phase of our lives with precision. And yet, look at the plants, the weeds, the flowers, the trees, the seeds. They don't agonize over their existence. They simply grow. They regenerate. They fulfill their purpose without hesitation, without questioning. Some might say, but humans are more complex. We innovate, we build, we create. We're so intellectual. But I would argue that it doesn't make us superior to the flora we so easily walk by and not notice. In many ways, we are not the smarter beings on this planet. Unlike plants, we have lost our connection to our root system. We search for purpose, yearn to reconnect with our inner child, untangle our traumas. Entire industries profit from our disconnection, selling us idols to follow and methods to heal. Meanwhile, plants are deeply intertwined in a vast intelligent network. They instinctively utilize both the external and internal systems to stay regulated, to flourish. They balance their masculine and feminine energies effortlessly, producing pollen, seeds, and lush leaves without resistance. And the most remarkable thing? They don't complain about the weight of existence. They don't wonder if they're lost. They just are. Their purpose is woven into their very being, and maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson in that for us, because what if purpose isn't something we have to find? What if it's something we are? Plants don't strive to become, they simply grow in the direction they were meant to. Maybe the lesson isn't about seeking, fixing, or proving ourselves, but about remembering, returning to what we already are, deeply rooted, inherently whole, and perfectly designed to bloom in the conditions we are given. And perhaps wildcrafting is an invitation for us to do just that. With gratitude and grace, have a wonderful day.